Hello again. It's your boy Fang, back after a long absence. I've been sick, I've also been lazy, and I've also just started another semester of school, so that would be the reason for the relative lack of videos of late. This is Atlantic Fleet. It's the first game by the company that also makes Cold Waters, which is the submarine simulator. And I figured I would do a campaign of this game because it's fairly interesting and I've never played it beyond a few hours. Did some skirmishing. I've booted up a campaign mode, and the premise of the campaign mode is that you start with an amount of in-game currency called renown, and you gain currency for sinking enemy ships. Specifically, you gain currency in relation to the tonnage of the ship you sink. So, I have started the campaign, spent 1,000 renown on a Flower-class Corvette. As we plink away at the ship beyond us, which is a German freighter, it's just called MS Large Freighter, we're going to start registering some hits with our 4-inch gun, which is the main armament in this game on the Flower-class Corvette. Actually, the Flower-class Corvette's a pretty interesting class of ship. It's a convoy escort. Explicitly, it's a convoy escort. And it has a fairly mixed armament. It's got the aforementioned 4-inch gun, which is, well, quite small caliber. It's a single mounting up at the front. It's also got, I think it's 3 anti-aircraft guns, yes. A 37mm anti-aircraft gun and two 20mm. It's also equipped with the Squid anti-submarine rocket launcher, which is a multiple rocket launch system. You fire it at a submerging submarine or a submarine on the surface, and you can fire it relatively quickly, and because there's a fair amount of spread on the rockets, you stand a reasonably good chance of hitting it. It also has depth charges, as you might expect. Well, that looked like a pretty good hit there, actually. We're going to go check on that. Click on the ship. Just damage to the AAA system. Maybe we lit off a small magazine of 20mm shells or something. Anyway, the Flower-class Corvette. It's pretty slow. It can do 16 knots, which gives it roughly half the top speed of a destroyer from its time period. At least a British destroyer from its time period. And that kind of presents a problem, because although it's certainly fast enough to catch a submerged U-boat, it is in fact slower than a surfaced U-boat. That largely operationally wouldn't actually be a problem, because if a U-boat sees a ship on the surface with a gun, it dives. Because, I mean, it can plink away with its deck gun at the Corvette, but all it takes is one good shell from the Corvette, and you get a hole in your pressure hull and you can, well, submerge. Actually, you can submerge. It's the resurfacing which you can't do. So, generally speaking, the speed of the Flower-class Corvette is a problem in terms of its ability to rapidly do anything, but it's not so slow that it can effectively deal with U-boats. I have to make a brief correction about something I just said. I've described the armament of the Flower-class Corvette. It does not, in fact, have a Squid multiple rocket launch system. It has the Hedgehog multiple rocket launch system. The Squid is present in future classes of Corvette during this war. The main difference is the size of the rocket fired. The Squid fires less of them, but they're significantly heavier. The Hedgehog system is present actually also during the D-Day landings from offshore ships that fire them, and it's also used in a more limited capacity on land-to-land firing. So I wanted to correct that, and I also should mention that the 37mm gun on the flexible mount is in fact a pom-pom 40mm. I also want to make mention about the ship in terms of its handling capabilities in the ocean. I mentioned that it can do 16 knots, and that's pretty piddling for a warship. What's probably worse about it is how unseaworthy it is, in some ways, and in very limited ways. It's not that it would sink in the rough seas of the North Atlantic. It would list, however, pretty alarmingly. 40 degrees to either side was considered normal. It didn't swamp the ship, it didn't sink the ship, but it would have been quite uncomfortable. It also pitched up and down in the waves pretty significantly. It's a very short ship, and when it did that, it would flood the upper decks for a while, and that would be pretty bad because it tended to get below the waterline into the compartments, and that's where people slept. So it was pretty damp down there. And in fact, the crew complement was 85 on this small ship, and that was again kind of a problem because it wasn't designed initially for that many men, and the sleeping accommodations for the crew were horrible. The place where the crew slept, what should have been the cabin for a much smaller amount of men, was probably no greater than a good-sized living room. I've been on a Flower-class Corvette, which I'll get to later, and it's shockingly small in terms of its crew accommodations. People would sleep on tables and anywhere they could throw a blanket, basically. Still, I would consider it much worse to be on that damn freighter we're plinking away at. On the HMS Bergamot over here, which is the name of the ship. You get to pick a name for the ship when you buy it with a renown. At least we're the ones doing the shooting, and it'll all be over soon. But not too soon. It's taking an awful long time to sink the damn freighter with our 4-inch shells. This kind of illustrates one of the problems, I would say, with the Flower-class Corvette, in that it's very specifically built to deal with submarines. God, would you not want to run into a German surface raider in one of these things? Thankfully, it appears that none ever did. And it's all fun now when we're firing at this unarmored transport, this freighter. But in later missions, the Germans shoot back, and we'll have to check in then and see how the Flower-class Corvette holds up.